I want to remain anonymous due to the nature of this story. See, I was in the Marine Corps. No, I wasn't in any special forces or anything unique per se. I was just a regular rank and file Marine. I was stationed at 29 Palms Marine Corps Air Ground Combat Training Center, MCAGCT for short. I wasn't the only one who has seen or experienced things in the training grounds and surrounding areas. I was told to keep my mouth shut, but I'm gonna die soon anyway, so even if they do come for me, it isn't going to make a difference. It was during early April, so the weather wasn't too bad. It wasn't hot during the day, and it wasn't cold at night. I always enjoyed doing field ops during that time of the year. I got away from the dumb crap that we had to do day in and day out back on Mainside, and I was typically left to my own devices while out in the field. So late one night, me and a buddy of mine are doing fire watch for our section of the rest area. We had our rifles, plate carriers, helmets with our NVGs, night vision goggles, mounted on the front, and rifles with us. We also had 4 mags apiece of live ammo. That night, an artillery battalion was doing night practice, so you'd hear the echo of the guns followed by the sound of the shells hitting the ground and exploding. It just sounded like far-off thunder. Me and my friend were talking about just random crap when I flipped down my NVGs and saw movement out in the distance. At first I thought it was just the green tint of the goggles screwing with my head, but then I saw it again. I tapped my buddy and asked if he was seeing this. He flipped down his NVGs too and he nodded. Yeah, but what is it? Coyote? He asked. No, too big to be a coyote. Besides, it looks like it's running around on 2 legs, I said back to him. That's when he tapped me and pointed out into the dark. There's more than one, bro, he said. I looked at where he was pointing, and that's when I saw 4 or 5 other figures darting around in the dark. These things weren't that big. I'd say maybe 5'5", give or take. They also appeared to be very strong and built with massive arm and leg muscles. They were dark and their skin looked leathery. They had big dark eyes and no nose to speak of. Their mouth was wide and filled with razor-sharp teeth. They walked around hunched over with their arms dangling by their sides. Their arms themselves were massive. They ran at insane speeds, occasionally running on all 4. They had 4 fingers on each hand and the claws were long and sharp. It was like they had daggers on their fingers for nails. Dude, I think they're getting closer. I nodded. Yeah, I'm gonna go get the corporal up. He nodded and I raced over to where our corporal was sleeping and shook him awake. Hey man, there's something out there. You need to come take a look. He cursed under his breath and sat up. This better be good, he said as he sat up. That's when we heard gunfire. I raced back to my buddy who was frantically shooting into the dark. I looked and I saw these creatures out in the dark, maybe 400 to 300 yards away. As other Marines had woken up to the sound of my buddy shooting, the OIC, or officer in charge, came running up asking what the hell was going on. When we pointed to the creatures, he froze in place. About this time, we heard tons of gunfire suddenly erupt from another unit who was conducting training as well. When I looked back at where these things were, they were no longer there. Instead, they were running on all 4s directly at us. I raised my rifle and began to fire at them, as those with guns and ammo joined in, and the others who didn't ran back to get theirs. I lined up my sight with the closest one and began to fire into it. I saw chunks of its flesh get ripped off when I hit it, and it tumbled down. But without missing a beat, it regained its balance and kept sprinting at us. At that point, I knew our rifles were useless, but I wasn't going to leave my buddy. That's when I heard the OIC yelling for us to get back in the trucks and get the hell out of there and get back to Mainside. Me and my friend turned and booked it for our 7-ton. I flipped on the battery switch and my buddy cranked the truck on. As we began to start moving, I looked out the window in time to see these things reach the camp. A Marine who hadn't realized what was going on until it was too late was impaled by one of the creature's claws and fell to the ground. I watched as he tried to crawl away. But the thing leaned over and bit his upper torso and head completely off with a single bite. As we began to turn out of there, I saw a Humvee that had 3 of these things on racing towards it. The guy in the turret tried to flip the 50 cal around to unload into the creatures, but he wasn't fast enough, and one of them ripped him out of the turret and flung him to one of the others. He didn't have time to move before the thing sank its claws into his chest and began to eat him. I watched as the thing on top of the Humvee then jumped down onto the hood and shattered the bullet-resistant front glass and pulled out the mangled corpse of the driver and run off into the desert with him. The remaining 3 Marines got out and made a run for our truck. I tapped my buddy to let them get on. They never made it. One by one, the things picked them off and ran off with them, their screams fading off into the desert. By the time we got back onto the main road, back to Mainside, and caught up with the rest of our unit, we noticed how active the night sky had become. There were helicopters everywhere with searchlights. We figured someone had called it in and they were trying to find the creatures or the missing Marines. Well, what was left of them anyways. When we were next up at the checkpoint, I noticed something off about the guys manning it. They wore all black, with black ski masks over their face and their NVGs down. They didn't have any patches, name tapes, or no identification with them. They were armed to the teeth, though. One of their vehicles had a minigun mounted on it. They all carried high-powered rifles with high-tech sights, laser sights, and other attachments on their rifles. When it was our turn, they had us step out of the truck and tell them what we saw. After we explained everything, the guy in charge looked at my friend and listed off his full name, date of birth, social security number, where his mom and dad were, the name of his dog that he had when he was in middle school. Then he looked at me and did the same thing. Once he was done, he looked at both of us. If you mutter a word of what actually happened here tonight, you and your families will disappear for good. Do you understand? We both nodded with our jaws on the floor. The guy had mentioned things that I had never told anyone about. They then told us that if anyone asks, a group of Marines went off to go get something and wound up getting lost. With that, they sent us on back to the main side of the base. I got out about a year after that, but I never went on another field op again. To this day, I still relive that night when I go to bed each night. I just hope that whoever they were, they killed those things so no more Marines have to go out like that. In short, if you're ever stationed in 29 Palms, California, and you go out on a field op, keep an eye out in the dark, and be sure you aren't too far away from a vehicle, and pray those things don't decide to turn you into a meal.
How would you like to die today?
It was just redundant at this point. I already knew what I had to do. I ignored it and laid in bed, pretending to be asleep. But there was no point. It knew I was awake already. I could feel a dull headache throughout my body from yesterday when I was violently beaten to death. Now, I was as good as new, except for the soreness.
How would you like to die today?
I knew it would simply keep repeating itself until I chose. I sat up and looked at the thing standing at the foot of my bed. It looked like a child, a little girl with long, dirty hair and a torn bow on her head. But this wasn't a child. Children don't make you choose how you're going to die every single day. At least, not literally. It was too painful to look at it. It was so familiar, and yet I knew that it was just some thing. An empty shell with an outward appearance that was meant to deceive me. I guess that's just part of the torture. It smiled at me pleasantly while it waited for me to answer.
Would you like some choices?
I guess, I sighed.
Would you like some choices, yes or no?
Yes, I replied. It nodded its head once. It looked the same way in my memories.
Your choices for today are strangulation, overdose, or jumping off the roof of your office building.
I looked above its head and at my reflection in the mirror, as if that was supposed to save me from this.
Would you like me to repeat your choices?
I knew I had to work late anyway today, and since I would already be at work, I'll do the jump, I replied.
Choice noted. You have until 11:59 p.m. to die. I'll update you every 2 hours.
I got ready for work, ate breakfast, and dropped my kids off at school. I was at a red light when I saw a girl on a skateboard roll out onto the street as a car was passing by. The driver managed to stop the car, and the girl held onto the hood of the car as the driver honked angrily. She would have died if you didn't do this. I glanced at the passenger seat, and there it was, its shoes dripping mud on the floor of my car. I stared at the left one, a dirty black shoe with the missing buckle, until the car behind me honked its horn and snapped me out of my trance. 2 years of this crap, and you'd think I'd be used to it by now. I finally got to work and spent the rest of my day at my desk, getting reminders every 2 hours. I didn't finish work until 9:30. I had less than 2 hours left before I had to jump off the roof. I was already falling asleep in the dark office. Everyone else had left, and the cleaning crew would get here at any minute. I must have dozed off for a while because I woke up at the last reminder.
You have 30 minutes left.
I begrudgingly got up and made my way up to the roof. It was freezing up there, and I hadn't brought a jacket with me. Why would I need one, though, if I was going to die? I stepped towards the edge of the roof and peered over the ledge. This was going to hurt like a bitch. It was way higher than the last building I had jumped from. I sighed and my breath formed puffs in the cold air.
You have 15 minutes left.
I don't want to do this anymore.
Someone must die.
I know, but I don't want to do this anymore.
You're selfish. You've saved a lot of people who would otherwise have died.
I know.
You have 12 minutes left.
I don't care.
This was your choice, no?
I'm not doing it. I stepped back until I was a safe distance from the edge.
Someone must die. If not you, then someone else.
I understand that.
Are you okay with that?
Doing this was supposed to stop my daughter from dying, but it didn't. Now this is even worse. I looked over at it, standing there, watching me and waiting for me to jump.
Are you okay with that?
She died anyway, and then Jean left me and the kids.
You have 8 minutes left. Are you okay with it?
I took a deep breath and nodded. I'm okay with it.
Very well.
I walked back down, got into my car, and drove home in silence. It didn't appear in my car again, or at all, for the rest of the night. I got home and checked on the kids. My sister had put them to bed and they were fast asleep under their matching blankets. I changed my clothes and fell into bed. The next morning I woke up before my alarm went off. I kept my eyes shut for a moment, but it was quiet. I finally opened them and stared up at the ceiling, avoiding the foot of my bed, scared of it being back. I finally worked up the nerve to look. It was empty. I sighed in relief and a little bit of sadness, got up, showered, and got dressed before going downstairs. My sister had already left hours ago, and I saw Ben in the kitchen eating cereal. "Where's your sister?" I asked. "She's still sleeping." "What? Why didn't you wake her up?" I asked, looking at the time. "I tried. She didn't want to get up." I ran back down the hall. "Amelia, you need to get up now. It's time for school." I walked into the room and over to the bed where I pulled the covers down, revealing her head, her curls crushed up and messy from sleep. "Em." I shook her and she rolled over, but didn't get up. "Amelia, this isn't funny." I leaned over her and realized something. She wasn't breathing. I stared at her as she laid there still. Behind me, I heard a familiar voice.
How would you like to die today?
I stood up straight and turned around slowly to look at it. It was even worse than I thought. It looked different now. Short, messy brown curls instead of the long brown hair. It was a new face. A new everything entirely. I stared at it, and I couldn't get my lips to move. Of course it wasn't over. The torture had just been turned up a notch.
How would you like to die today?
A little background first. I was serving a 15-year sentence in a penitentiary in southern Arizona. What I was in there for isn't important. During my stay there were countless things that happened that no one could explain, and even more that no one wanted to know more about. It all started with a prison legend. Supposedly, years ago, something awful and unexplainable happened in the prison. Every morning we'd be woken up and expected to stand near the front of our cells while guards visually confirmed we were present and accounted for. Apparently, about a year before I got sent there, the most brutal and unexplainable thing happened during one of these routines. A man who had a cell to himself looked very off during his check. When a guard pulled over another guard to help him check it out, they found it wasn't actually the prisoner they were expecting at all. It was a totally different man. This man was wearing the skin of the other man over him, loosely fitting draped over him, apparently looked like a real monster. The scariest things were, though, was the guy wearing the skin was not an inmate. They had no idea how he even got into prison, let alone a cell. What's worse is that they couldn't even figure out who the hell he was. He wasn't documented anywhere. And what's worse than that, they never even found the body of the man of the skin he was wearing. pretty grisly stuff, I know. And I realize that's not the go-to definition of a skinwalker, but that's what the prison called him, the skinwalker. Didn't help that the guy never talked, apparently. Anyway, that's what started the whole skinwalker superstition around the yard. Apparently, the guy got shipped to a different spot about a month after it happened, and just about everyone in Gen Pop felt all the better for it. I heard about this story on the second day of my stay. Hell of a story to hear to place in your home for the foreseeable future. Now onto the real stuff, though. Sure, that guy was the skinwalker, but all he did in the long run was get an old lifer Navajo inmate to tell everyone about actual skinwalkers. It seemed like a lot of the prison culture actually revolved around them. Now, apparently, skinwalkers are tricky to point out on the spot, but if you manage to survive around one for more than a minute or two, almost everyone can tell the mannerisms are all off. They can mimic human speech but not replicate it. They twitch maniacally. They have an unnatural gait while walking. But apparently, they got better with experience. The old Navajo guy, his name is Carl, said that he was sure there was an actual one among the prisoners, slowly picking us off over the years. He called it the Grand Master Skinwalker at one point. Apparently, he thought it had human mannerisms down so well that you might not even be able to tell it was your cellmate for a day or two. It had to be good, he posited one night. He would expect a skinwalker to jump at any opportunity for a kill, but this one realized it had a revolving door of people to kill coming to it, and masterfully bided its time, as Carl thought, for years. A lot of guys found humor in it. A lot more were really on edge about it. Every once in a while in prison people snap. Sometimes you'll find your cellmate swinging in front of your bunk, strung up around the neck by his pant leg. Sometimes you just can't take it anymore. But in our yard, people tended to snap in a very special way. It wouldn't be an outburst at dinner or a silent suicide in the night. Guys would just stop talking, hunch over and shuffle around. Any friendships they had would be mostly out the window. They would turn into a loner during rec time. They would let their hair hang in front of their face. No one liked to talk about it. Like, if they did, it would happen to them next. I felt the same way. I didn't know if it was a skinwalker or just people going crazy, but I didn't want to find out. It wasn't clockwork or anything, but every time someone snapped in this way, it wasn't more than a couple weeks before they were shipped off or transferred to God knows where, without anyone else knowing beforehand. Then there was the nighttime occurrences. Short, loud bursts of sound echoed through my cell block during all hours of the night on a regular basis. It sounded like a mix between a pig's dying squeals and nails on a chalkboard. Just another thing no one liked to talk about. Even scarier were the shadows and footsteps. The block was dimly illuminated in the night by a few lights hanging from the ceiling outside the cells. I myself saw shadows flit across the wall on a regular occasion, when there were definitely no guards near my cell. One time near the end of my sentence, I woke up, looked at my back wall and found a perfect silhouette of a person standing there. But when I looked, my bunkmate was asleep, and no one was outside my cell. And the footsteps? Everyone hated the footsteps. They were the scariest part in the night. Sometimes, more rarely than the shadows, you would hear ungodly fast footsteps. They sounded like wet feet slapping on tile floor. Whatever caused them would fly from one end of the block to the other in a dead sprint. Whatever it was inhumanely fast. If you happened to be awake before it started, by the time you heard the footsteps on one side of your cell and whipped your head around to see the thing run by, it sounded like it was 3 cells past you. Everyone hated the footsteps. I agreed. I thought they were the worst. I was released from that place about a month ago, and I have more stories than I can count. I swear it was nearly my turn. About a week before I was discharged, my cellmate and a good friend of mine snapped. In the same kind of way. I didn't sleep for an entire week. Well, I did sleep, of course, but never for more than a few minutes at a time. Never turned my back on the guy. The scariest thing? I woke up one night to him somehow snaking his body through the bars of our cell. For reference, I couldn't get anything past my shoulder through them. The worst part, though, he was coming back into our cell. On the day of my release, I didn't say a word to him, just left. He seemed fine with it, so was I. I had to make it through. I had made it through 15 years of prison fights, gang disputes, and for all I know, skinwalker abductions. I left through the front gates a free man. As I walked along the fence for the rec yard, I spotted my cellmate standing off on his own, like he had for the last week or so. I shook my head, not even really sure if it was him anymore. I took one last look over the yard, this time from the other side of the fence. I wish I hadn't. There, standing off on his own, on the other side of the yard, was Carl, slouched over, eyeing the other inmates and twitching maniacally. Thank you for making it this far. I'd like to encourage you to subscribe if you like my content. If you'd like to follow me and want to be involved in what I'm doing / talk to me, follow me on Twitter or Instagram. If you'd like an offline experience, check out the podcast, The Midnight Podcast. And if you're at all inclined, I've got some merch out there to be purchased if you'd like to support the channel. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next video.